All right. Well, here we are. Welcome, everybody. We have a couple people in the chat, so that means that at least my message has gotten out to you all. And so welcome, one and all. This is absolutely, tonight is the experiment. I am I am doing this out of my, my side office, which has noises and it's going to be bumps in the night. It's going to be great fun. You guys are going to really enjoy this. So if you do hear things, or if you can or cannot hear me, I am watching the chat that is going on right now. So it seems like, based on the chat, that you guys are hearing and seeing. So anyhow, I'm going to get started. So anyhow, this is the class. I know that if you've started, you should have already had a look at the course introduction video, where I go through a lot of what I'm, kind of the basics of what the class is about. I go through the syllabus there. I'm not planning on going through the syllabus again, unless you guys really want me to. I was mostly interested in kind of just jumping into the content of the class, where we can start to go on a little bit of discussion about kind of where technology is at. I'd like to also know where you guys are at in terms of your knowledge of HTML and CSS, and where you guys are kind of, what experience you guys have had, where I can help hopefully bridge the gap for you guys and make sure that you guys are successful. Because, above and beyond anything else, my goal is to make sure you guys get something useful out of this class. So, all right, with that, we're going to dive in. If you haven't already had a look, you can click on the modules. I wanted to reiterate that we do have a couple of free discussion topics that are kind of all semester long discussion topics. We will have some modules that include a discussion topic as well. But you do have two that, generally speaking, you have access to throughout the entire semester. And this will be the Q&A about the course lounge. Again, those are for questions for me, or kind of communicating between yourselves. I don't really follow the student lounges much. So you guys want to smack talk, that's probably where you want to go. If it's Q&A or questions for me, definitely make sure that you get it in the Q&A, or send me a message using your inbox. Okay. Yeah, hopefully you guys have had a look at the class introduction, which is also on YouTube, where we've, this is the whole preamble sort of section where I want you guys to go through and get familiar. And okay, enough of that. Let's talk about stuff. So the class is Web Development 3, and I want to preface this already. I'm already prefacing this with the understanding that this class is evolving kind of as we speak. I know that I'm in the middle of, the department is in the middle of kind of kicking around the direction of its web courses. So I've been kind of given some guidance, and I'm trying to work towards that guidance, which is to really do a bit more emphasis on the JavaScript end of things, with the assumption that you guys in the CS50B class have gotten a stronger HTML5 and CSS3 kind of approach, where you've worked with things like Bootstrap, and you've worked with media queries, and you've worked with and if I'm wrong about any of this, absolutely let me know, either here in the chat or in the Q&A, or we'll figure out a way for feedback to happen on this. But what I am going to do, though, is I'm going to go through kind of a little bit of history, just for the point of, okay, so there's PHP and less. That's awesome. I will also I'm less likely to go down that road. I know that there was WordPress involved in the B class as well. Used to be the C class, we also did WordPress. I'm not going to be doing WordPress this semester. I'm doing something completely separate. So just be aware that I'm thinking more in terms of kind of the direction of single page web apps, though I don't think we're going to get there this semester. I think that this semester is going to be kind of a hybrid. So you'll still get a lot of useful information. I will still throw lots of resources your way. Don't feel like, you know, because you're in this semester that somehow you're being shortchanged, but rather that it is going to be the likely. It's just going to be an evolution. And so, you know, you guys are in the laboratory. You're the lab rats, and I am the white-coated lab manager, and you are my minions. All right, so let's go through this. What is HTML5? Now, again, this is going to be review, and that's okay. A lot of HTML5. So this is truly trying to compare and contrast HTML5 to HTML or HTML4 or previous versions. It should be that by now you guys are almost exclusively working in HTML5 all the time, but we'll go through a little bit of what got us here. This used to be a very kind of structured in terms of how earlier versions of HTML were introduced. What we want to make sure that you guys get out of this is that HTML5, when it came out a few years ago, really kind of transformed the landscape for web applications. And you know, a lot of people point towards the Apple kind of decision to not support Flash in its mobile devices as the kind of the milestone, that marker that defined the change, the sea change that has caused HTML5 to kind of be on the rise. And obviously Flash is so very nearly dead that we're all jumping for joy. So what is HTML5? It is new features added to old HTML5 HTML markup, and it's hard not to say HTML without adding the 5 anymore. There's tags, attributes, and new ways of using them. Other pieces on the page are implemented in JavaScript or sometimes other languages, and JavaScript is now part of every web page. And I think that's really part of what you get out of when you think about in the module there's a discussion about Chrome Dev Tools, and if you watch that video, which is another half hour, I go into some depth over that tool set, and it's really strong. But it proves that JavaScript is a key element of this. And it used to be a few years ago, you could say, hey, I don't want to use JavaScript. I'll just turn JavaScript off in my browser. And sometimes people were like, oh, for the most secure web experience, you should turn JavaScript off. If you turn JavaScript off in your browser these days, you don't really get to experience anything at all. Because it's like the air you breathe these days when it comes to using web technology. So what's cool, and the example here is still kind of valid, even though the name is totally changed, is that JavaScript is now it drives these new interactive websites. So the app that we're looking at here and is demonstrated is this Adobe Color CC, which is entirely running in your browser. And it allows you to kind of choose colors for your website. This is a great resource, by the way, for web designers to be able to find color palettes and ways of choosing colors that will work well together in a design. So, and you have these different types of color kind of sets. You can have, this one's the 5 analogous. You can have a monochromatic where it's all of them are in the same hue. You've got a triad where they're all at strategically marked spots on the color wheel. Complementary, where you have 2 opposite colors, and so on. What's nice, though, is that this gives you, as an aside, this really gives you some really interesting you know, kind of resources in terms of, okay, if you wanted a really red and green site, this would be the way to do it. Maybe you want a purple and green, or an indigo and, I don't know what that is, mustard looking sort of. So, you know, you can kind of work on these tools, and they're very responsive. They work really well no matter how big or small your browser is, and all of that is driven by HTML and CSS and JavaScript. All right. Let me get back to this. Yeah, when you're working in these new technologies, you're really starting to move beyond just flat, static web pages. You're really starting to build these really rich and very interactive experiences using a web browser. And there's lots of new APIs, and APIs, if you haven't heard of it before, is an application programming interface that allow you to kind of harness the power of these web browsers to really deliver an interesting and sometimes novel application for your audience. So integration with JavaScript really does end up helping to make cool interfaces. Used to be the JavaScript was used for things like rollovers. You know, you have events that you would fire if your mouse was rolls over a target element, it would fire off some JavaScript. And that was the earliest days of JavaScript was for animation. So there you go. But these days JavaScript is like absolutely, you know, it's in every corner of this. You know, now these days you also have 2D drawing. You can draw in 2D and even to a certain extent in 3D using the HTML5 canvas element. There's offline support, which is cool, meaning that used to be in older browsers you have cookies. How many people have ever heard of cookies in your browser? It's just a tiny piece of information that the web server kind of places inside your browser to kind of give it a you know, information that it can use to pick up where you left off when you leave and then come back to a website. You know, one of the concepts about web technology is that it is essentially, in its basic state, it is stateless, meaning that every time you hit a web server with a web browser, the web server technically doesn't know anything about your browser. It doesn't know anything where you came from, what you did. There are ways that it can divine that information through, you know, HTTP headers and other things like that. But generally speaking, it's a stateless system, meaning that every time you request a page from a web server, you know, that server doesn't necessarily know anything about you. So offline support nowadays includes things like web storage, which is actually a bigger block of storage for a web server to be able to use to temporarily or sometimes long-term store content on your browser, on the browser's data, you know, on the computer. Now, it is, you know, there are security kind of concerns there, but it is it's a well-defined API. It's a well-defined problem. Lots of applications that I'm sure you probably have heard of use it, including Google Docs, you know, Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Sheets, all of those apps for Google definitely use this. I know that the Microsoft Office 365 that runs in your web browser very similarly uses offline storage. The next thing is, well, actually, another, before I move on from offline support, is that there's also the notion of an indexed database. Now, I don't know that if any of you have heard of an application, it's a database application for web technology called Mongo, though there is a general sense, there's a general term for these kinds of databases, and they're called NoSQL, N-O-S-Q-L, that allow you to just kind of, with a single kind of identifier, you can store a block of information and then just be able to request it back very quickly. But web storage and IndexedDB are very, very similar in approaches. We'll talk about some of that in the class. We do have vector graphics in web technology. SVG is scalable vector graphics. Has been around for a while, but it is something that it's gotten some traction and it's good. It's an interesting technology, but it's not. It's a little bit hard to work on by hand. It's much easier to use tools to build SVGs than it is to code one by hand. You can. It is basically XML is what the file format looks like. So it's a text file. SVGs are text files, but they describe a vector graphic that draws on your screen. And geolocation and other APIs, which we will touch on in the course of the class. More advantages. There's native support of video and audio. A lot of people, this was like the killer app for HTML5 was being able to just directly embed video and audio into a website, which was something that took like so much pain and suffering to get through before. There are new forms capabilities. I'm not as likely to touch on them as I have done in previous semesters. So but I maybe, if you guys do give me feedback that, HTML forms are an area where it's, it's kind of a hallmark of, and it's the most basic kind of user interactivity apart from a hyperlink, is being able to request information from a visitor to a website and be able to do something with it. So that is part of it. Store data locally in the browser. Yes, that's what local web storage. Adding structure to pages, which we will talk a little bit about kind of semantic markup. That's coming up. We talk also about accessibility, which is really how to make folks who have challenges with either eyesight or hearing or touch, the things that most of us take for granted when we use web browsers generally are not available to every single visitor. So how do you code web pages that are making it easier for visitors of all abilities to be able to effectively use your website? Error handling, yes, of course, a lot of that is through JavaScript as well. Cleanups and fixes and new CSS3, including advanced selectors, animation, rounded corners, and so on. So it has been really, really cool and interesting to see how this has developed. So the evolution of HTML5 kind of happened. It's been a long road, it was interesting is that it did start in the early 1990s with just the basic HTML, and then it quickly kind of revved to HTML 3.2, and then kind of slowed down a bit towards the early 2000s when it went to HTML4, and then there was this kind of weird split where there was two camps. And I have to admit that I was in a camp that was talking about XHTML, which was a far more structured and kind of more strict approach to coding HTML, where because what ends up happening is when you have all of these different browsers, you had Internet Explorer, you had Chrome wasn't even around yet, you had Firefox, you had Internet Explorer, you had Opera. These browsers were all kind of, they generally liked to dance around each other. A lot of them didn't, they weren't working together. You would have to have very specific, very complicated rules of, if this is this server, you do this. If it's that browser, you'll switch this, or you'll use these prefixes. And a lot of that is still in place. A lot of it still is, but it has gotten better in the last 3-4 years with the advent of HTML5, is that all of the browser manufacturers are working more or less together, and none of them, that's not true. It's not none of them has an upper hand, because if you look at any browser share markings right now, Chrome is far and away the most common browser worldwide. And the former king of the hill, which was Internet Explorer, is just, it's been decimated. And so Microsoft has been kind of humbled and cowed and brought into line, and where they now play better with others in terms of how the browser processes HTML. So yeah, in 2004 there was this kind of split between HTML and XHTML, and you had the people that were very much of the point of view of they wanted HTML to be easy and just work, and the browser would do its best to render what it's given, which is, it's a very tolerant way of displaying and rendering content. Is, sometimes you'll forget to close a tag, and if you do that in HTML, it's no big deal. If you do it in XHTML strict, the page won't even load. It'll just give you an error and say, sorry, no dice. And so, those are the two competing kind of schools of thought here, and it really doesn't make any sense. And I was early on, I was kind of in that, if the document, the HTML is not well formed, to use the term, that the browser should probably just throw an error and ditch, because the author hasn't done their job in terms of creating a compliant document that can be shown and displayed. Now, clearly history has shown that I'm not right. And that's okay. I've come to kind of I've come to terms with that. And I think that what makes sense is that there's a wide range of experience. And I know that if XHTML was the law of the land in terms of kind of authoring content on the web, there would probably be fewer people doing it. It would be much easier to teach, because anytime you have to work with, if you're teaching this stuff, it's easier when it's a strict kind of merciless syntax that you can't stretch out of. The trouble is that you can't stretch out of it, and it doesn't make it very easy to innovate or to bring new technologies in. So like I said, I've come around to the school of thinking that HTML5 is the right direction, because it has exploded. I mean, absolutely exploded with all sorts of innovation in the marketplace for new technologies, and it's really kind of the technology to use for a wide range of stuff, not just the things that you're thinking about either. Because I mean, you'll talk about digital signage, like, you might drive down the freeway, look at a digital billboard, and that digital billboard is entirely likely to be displaying HTML to you, but you can't tell because it's so seamless now that it's a really, really appealing way to think about how to display any content. So, all right. Yeah, so this is indicative, okay? So this first, you have XHTML strict, which is this like long drawn out doc type. So as a reminder, doc type is that's the element that's at the very, very top of your HTML file. It doesn't have a closing tag. It's just, this is a descriptor that basically tells the browser when it first reads the file, this is the document that's inside of here. This is what you should be able to count on inside of this document. And obviously, as you see in HTML5, it has simplified somewhat. Yes? Again, with HTML, they used to do this old school meta tag that would do, and I remember typing these over and over again, HTTP equiv, and then there's this long, content type, and then the content would be this long string where it talks about text HTML and char set as being UTF-8. These days, you can just type meta char set equals UTF-8, and UTF-8 is the Unicode, character codes that allow for kind of an international ability for and this is really just talking about how the text file is being encoded. Generally speaking, we're not going to be using anything other than UTF-8. I know that there was, and I don't even remember if it's ISO 8859 or there's another char set that you could use, but there's no reason to use it. So I generally advise people that are creating new web pages that this is the way to do it now. You have these, yeah, you had old style sheet declarations. Part of it was that you went through a link and you still use the link tag, but the attributes that you use with it have simplified a fair bit. You don't have to worry about, it's assuming that the link that you're putting in there will, the file name itself will indicate what the type is. It's so, types are generally not being specified inside of HTML. They're actually being specified by the web server that's serving it up. So you can link any file in here, and it could be an HTML file, could be JavaScript file, could be CSS. And when the browser goes to pull that resource, because it's a related resource, it's going to use the fact that it's a style sheet, that you specified it there, and it's also going to use the fact that the web server, when it makes that request, the web server is going to say, oh, by the way, here's the type of file this is, and it's going to use both of those pieces of information to make a determination of what to do with this. What else is new? Man, the biggest thing about HTML5 that kind of really transformed things for me was the understanding of semantics, semantic markup, where you have more than just divs and spans to describe what's going on in your document. So it used to be that you would just use divs for block structures, and you'd use spans for inline structures. And now you have a wider range of options here. And that's not a bad thing, because I believe that, if you follow these, and we will go into them in detail later, don't worry about it tonight. If you follow along with these, it actually helps not just you, it helps the web browsers, it helps search engines, and it helps, again, that accessibility notion of a visitor who is not using their eyeballs, their ears, or their fingers necessarily to navigate this web page. It gives them ways of consuming the content of the web page more easily. And I mean, and that absolutely is a huge difference. And you're going to hear accessibility from me a lot, because it's an important aspect of this. Did you guys remember, were you guys given any instruction on ARIA or accessibility in web technology? If you can type in there, or even if you'll just say, hey, I'm still here. I haven't disconnected from the chat. I sure hope everyone's still doing this with me. Yeah, it looks like we're still going. So looking behind. So, all right, cool. So there's not much in the way of accessibility that you guys have gotten. So we will talk. I'll make some room in the schedule to kind of go through that, because it does. There's specific things you can do with HTML and styling that can make it easier for all visitors, no matter how able they are, to be able to visit your website and understand it and make sense of it for them. Man, a lot more elements. There was a lot of elements that were introduced with HTML5, and I mean, a lot of these are hugely popular. Audio, video, canvas for drawing. You have, I don't use a lot more of these. Mark is interesting. Sometimes you'll find, some of these, and actually, this is an older lecture. I remember that some of these tags actually have been deprecated since this lecture was put together. So just be aware, though, that there are specific new elements in addition to just semantics that make sense here. Now, document object model. If you guys have had any amount of JavaScript, you should understand at least a little bit of this. The idea here is that when you load a web page into a browser, it creates a structure that it doesn't, it doesn't actually look like this, but it does have this sort of structure. If you were to think of it in terms of a top-down tree where you have an HTML element, and then underneath that, you're really going to have two elements under HTML. You're going to have the head, you're going to have the body. In the head, you're going to have things like title. You're going to have script tags. You're going to have metas. You're going to have links. You're probably not going to have paragraphs or other stuff because those don't belong there. Under body, you're going to have, you're going to have paragraphs. You're going to have H1s, H2s, main, section, article, all of the semantic markup as well that can go in there, divs and spans and etc. that all kind of comprise the makeup of the document that you're seeing. So it is, I don't call it a map, I call it a tree because that's the actual data structure that you're kind of looking at here. The thing that to understand is that it is a tree in that there's no way for, once you're on one side or the other of this split here, where you're looking, if you see that you have the head area over here on the left, you have the body area on the right, there's no way for any of the elements under here to ever, kind of move over or connect directly to any of the elements over here. There's a very rigid kind of split that way, and that exists. That's because it's the way that when the browser's loading the HTML, it's got to fit. It's got to make sense of it, and so this is how it makes sense of it. All right, so yeah, and you guys, this should definitely be something that's a review for you guys. HTML is your structure. It is the content, the actual words and pictures and other things that are being displayed. It does define objects in terms of how, when you create HTML, you are defining elements, and the elements in this case comprise objects. They're little things inside the browser. When you talk about CSS, you're really talking about the presentation. You're talking about what it looks like. And so we've gone through a fair bit of kind of cleanup of the HTML, which used to have lots of the presentation built into it. Almost all of that has been deprecated or just removed outright, and now meaning that it would be ignored in favor of the styling being provided by CSS so that it can directly do that presentation layer for you. And then finally, you have JavaScript, which really is supposed to define behavior, which is the dynamic aspect of this. When you talk about HTML and CSS, largely, because CSS now does have dynamic elements to it, but they're really defined at the when they're written. They're not defined at when you go to visit the site, meaning that you're generally speaking, unless you're using JavaScript to do this, you're not altering the behavior of your HTML and CSS in the browser once those files are loaded, unless you're using JavaScript. So JavaScript is really supposed to be indicating the behavior, which alters these objects. A browser will load a document into DOM, into a document object model, and then JavaScript can then interact with those things using the DOM to be able to kind of make those changes, to alter the way it appears, the way it functions, or even the data that's presented. So yeah, a lot of these, as I was saying, a lot of HTML got kind of cleaned up, and has been, a lot of things have been either mostly deprecated, not removed outright, but mostly deprecated in favor of CSS alternates. So you should not be using font tags or big maybe. I mean, man, that gets that's almost a semantic tag. You can almost make an argument for that, and I might do a little bit of research to make sure that it's actually deprecated. For instance, I do know that U and S, I do believe that those have been, those are deprecated, but they do have semantic meaning. So again, B and I, which used to be bold and italic, actually don't technically don't mean that anymore. They mean B is for something that is important, and I is for something that you want to highlight. But so they give it semantic meanings. So even though the I, it just says B and I, and you might still think in terms of bold and italic, the semantic meanings of those tags has changed. That they're not, this is boldface, because that would be a styling choice. It is, you put B tags around content that you want to emphasize, or that you want to make, and that's why you have EM for EM tags for emphasis, and you have strong tags for making text stronger, even though that's a very kind of, that's walking the fine line between style and semantics there. So there are other things in here. Most effectively though, you have the notion of center tags, and the align equals center attribute has definitely been kind of, it will still display it in the browser. The browser will still read those tags and render them as such, but you might actually see browser warnings now about that sort of behavior, or at least in the console of the developers tools, it's going to mention you ought not be using this anymore. So, and more. Again, a lot of these are have been superseded by these CSS attributes that you can now use in the place, and they're actually more functional and in a lot of ways easier to kind of comprehend. You don't miss them as easily, I think, is the point. Tables, yeah, especially the idea of cell spacing and padding. There's a whole thing. Give me another checkpoint here. How much of the box model do you guys believe you understand at this point? Have you guys been shown aspects of the box model in terms of, do you guys know the difference between padding and margins and borders, and how that affects how it displays on the screen? Does that make any sense to you guys? Because the box model is actually going to come into play. We're going to talk about something called Flexbox, which takes, it was beaten into you, but I believe it. So we're going to talk about Flexbox, which actually kind of moves beyond, into the next level of how you can easily flow content and make sense of it. You guys did not get Flexbox, if I'm not mistaken. You guys probably haven't seen that yet. It's still kind of fresh, so that's part of the reason why I'm not as concerned. But it's generally this year, in the last year, Flexbox has gotten to the point where people are like, yeah, I'm doing it now. So it's about time that I thought, yeah, it's probably a good time to bring in to show you guys. If it's something you've already seen, let me know, and I'll be like, yeah, all right, I'll do something else, because there's plenty to show you. Let's see what else. Yeah, so it clears, yes, the spaces. Any place where it talks about the attribute or the element kind of speaks to layout or displaying, all of those attributes have been replaced with CSS, and you really shouldn't be playing with, putting these elements into your HTML. You really should be, all of that should be done now in CSS. Okay. Yeah, in HTML, they also pulled a lot of features that nobody was using, and some of them are good riddance too for a lot of it. Most notably, the idea of frame sets and frames. I hated this with a passion that could ignite a million suns, and so I don't miss the fact that it's gone. I'm not thrilled that iframe is still there, but hey, we can't all have what we want. It's iframe is still considered a necessary evil, because there's a lot of content that you will want to have one or the other showing in your browser from other sites, and if you don't have an easy API or the ability to request that content directly from the site, you need to use something like an iframe that will embed it into your site for you. Obsolete markup, yes, these are all, you know, mostly gone there, or they've been replaced. Object is still one of these, it's another one of these elements that is, it's kind of, it's very wishy-washy for me. I don't have much love for it, but whatever, it's all good. The notion of, importantly though, the notion of anchor tags. So if you know what the A tag is a link, you know, when you hyperlink off to something, used to be that you could create an anchor tag by just calling an empty, you know, A tag with a name, put a name on it, and then you could use something like, you know, this hash up here. So where you see that, when you'll see hash and then the string. So if this was hash top, that's what it would find this area of the web page and go there. This has all been removed and replaced with the notion of ID, which is why in CSS, when you have elements that have an ID kind of assigned to them, that first of all, it's unique, meaning that there's only one of those in the whole page. And because if you were to type in up in the URL, you take the URL and you add the hash plus the ID, the browser will say, oh, you want me to push you down to where that part of the page is. And that's been something that has, you know, that was a big change for a lot of old timers like myself. Okay, so we're almost there. Browser tools for web developers. So, you know, again, there's the video that is in the video lecture section that talks about Chrome development tools, and I go into much more detail than I would do here. Most browsers, so Chrome has it, Firefox has it. I'm not as, I haven't used Internet Edge, so I don't know about Microsoft Edge. If it is, if it has dev tools, I would suspect they do. I believe Opera also has developer tools, but I'm not sure who's using Opera anymore. And Safari does have as well. So, you know, you do have options that will allow you to kind of peek behind the curtains and look at how the browser is displaying a given web page. So yeah, so, and again, this was from a previous iteration of the lecture. We're not going to go into dev tools, but I will show you quickly how to access them, and you're always free to do this, is go to this menu right here. It used to be a little hamburger icon, now it's the 3 dots. Go down to more tools, and then click on developer tools, and it will pop up. The other way to do it is to use the keyboard shortcut, which on a Mac is Option-Command-I, or you can right or command click or control click on a given item, go down to inspect, and it's going to launch the dev tools right there. So you see right away, and mine launches in a vertical kind of a vertical orientation, because I think that's what when I finished my video lecture on that, I was in this orientation. Normally, I think if you've never run it before, it would end up kind of taking this bottom pane. And again, I'm not going to go through an exhaustive thing in here, but just you guys should get to know this if you haven't already. It is a fantastic development environment for HTML by itself. And that's pretty cool. I mean, that's just not something that, you know, I had. These 4 or 5 years ago, this was like touching the electric rail. You just couldn't believe that this was possible. So it's a great time to be alive, everybody. And don't mind the fact that there's apparently 4 errors in my lecture slides. Yeah, because that's not cool. Okay, so let's see what the time check. Yeah, we're about 50 minutes in. So what I'm likely to do from here is talk about a variety of things that we're gonna use, and I will mention also your homework for this week is largely comprised. So get this, man, we're changing things dramatically this year from last year. Last year when I did this class, we went through the whole kind of headache of go set up a student account. You know, on the Santa Rosa Junior College Linux server for students, and then you're going to set up web hosting and all this stuff. I'm kind of like, no, let's not do that. So instead, I chose to use this site. It is called Cloud9. How many of you guys have heard of Cloud9? I got this from Ethan from last, we were talking from, because he teaches the B class, and he was mentioning that he was looking to use this. And I looked at it and I said, oh, hey, this is perfect. I think this is perfect for what we want to use for homework, for collaboration, for checking work. Yeah, I as soon as I started to play with it, I said, oh yeah, this is definitely a good tool. So we're going to be using this pretty much from the beginning. So part of your homework is to set up an account on this, and I'm going to, everybody who's registered in the class, I'm going to basically tonight send out the invites to Cloud9. You can create an account now on Cloud9, and there's a tutorial that shows you how to do that. But I do it through the point of view of sending you the email and going and clicking the link in the email to create the account. So if you guys want to do it, where you already have an account, that's cool. You can do it that way. You can wait until I get you the email. You should be seeing it tonight. This is Wednesday. So the other tool that I wanted to use, and maybe you guys do or don't know about this one, is called CodePen. CodePen, and the tagline is perfect to describe this. It is a playground for the front end of the web, meaning that it is really an interesting place to go for not just ideas, but it's great for testing things, trying things out, and being able to quickly see the results of what you're testing as you go. So just as an example, let's take because I haven't looked at this, this is today's daily SVG. So day 18, and well, this is the 18th, so maybe this is why. So you'll see that in this example, and I just pulled this up, I swear to God, I didn't pull this, I hadn't even looked at this before, is it is an HTML and CSS, but notice that the HTML is an SVG. So this is actually a vector graphic that is being rendered here, and you can see that, well, it keeps on going. So yeah, this is pretty far out. I mean, it talks about there's polygons, and so all of these are being done that way, but it also has some CSS that shows you how it colors each of these. So it kind of, they're given, I guess, let me see. I'm trying to, now I'm looking at this like, how did they do this? And this is what CodePen's great for, is being able to pull up somebody's work and be able to kind of pick it apart. And you can type in this. This is live. So, I mean, you can go in here and change this. So it's like, oops, except you don't want to change it quite that much. But the idea is that you can fool with this. Yeah, CodePen, I agree. It is a really fantastic tool for just being able to see what's going on out there. So that's one. There are more. Sometimes the demos in here can get a little wild. This one's a canvas where the icons morph, and so this one's using a little bit of everything. Understand that they do offer the notion of pre-processed for CSS and for JavaScript. So I'm not going to go into, maybe towards the end of the semester, we'll see how much time we've got. We might go into different aspects of JavaScript that let you be able to access or alter how you use this. In this case, this is using a version of JavaScript that they call TypeScript. For the CSS, this is using SCSS as opposed to, say, SAS or less. It is using a different precompiler or preprocessor. Okay, so you'll see that you can actually create stuff in in all of this. So the question here of open source, are you asking, is this open source, like these different things that people are sharing? Actually, I wouldn't necessarily put it that way. Though I will tell you that some of the best, some of the best ideas that you'll find on the web are probably lifted from somebody else's ideas that were found on the web, which were lifted from somebody else's ideas. So to a certain degree, you know, they're showing you the source, meaning so it is open. You can see the source. Whether it is licensable or that it is ethical to copy it and use it for your own, that's a harder question to ask. You know, and I do believe that there are ways inside of here. Maybe they don't. Maybe it might be part of when you sign up for this that you that there's some mention of how you're licensing the code that you enter into the site, and that you're at least giving CodePen a license to display it, if nothing else. But that's a great question. I think that's a valid question, and it does cut to the heart of kind of a lot of what you're going to find on when you do, you know, the reverse engineering game is kind of a gray area for a lot of reasons in terms of intellectual property rights. So I don't go into detail on that. I have opinions and things, but I don't really that's not something that we will cover here. So those two sources are, you know, and I don't know how often I might just reference pens that I find in CodePen. We might use it as an exercise. We might do an exercise in CodePen, but I don't know that it's going to be the common place where we would say, turn in homework. Could it be? Absolutely, it could. You absolutely could do it. The cool thing about this is that you can do, you know, you can take this and turn it into a full page view pretty quickly so that you can kind of demo anything. But you got to be careful because you can't, with the free version of CodePen, you're kind of limited in terms of the sorts of things you can load. You can't load images, or you can't store images, so you'd have to have them hosted elsewhere. And that can be kind of a pain in the butt, pardon my French, but it's no lie. So I would say don't get, you know, CodePen is useful for kind of these proof of concepts. I wouldn't use it for a full experience. And I think that's what most folks end up using it for as well. All right. Okay, so it's, let's see. I think I got I got some time left in me. So let's now talk a little bit about some of the resources that I use on a regular basis. And again, we're still kind of taking this from the point of view of what sort of content do we expect to kind of be covering this semester. So one of the tools I use a lot and has been kind of critical for helping kind of, you know, navigate the waters of browser compatibility is this site called caniuse.com. Now, Caniuse is very, very useful. I don't know if any of you guys have used this, but it does fantastic in terms of if you want to find out whether your browser or any browser can support a given technology in the web. So let's talk about something that should be generally commonly available. Okay, so I'm going to say video tags, video element. All right. Now, when you look at that, you know, and all I did was I just typed and it automatically did the search for me. It's telling me that of all of the major browsers, with the exception of Opera Mini, which I'm not sure how many people are using it. I guess globally it's got a 4.3% share of the mobile browser market. But they're, you know, of almost all of them, they all support this and fully support it. usually there's no kind of known issues or other things. So there's areas where you can see how it's supported. And in the case of things like Firefox and Chrome, they're actually showing you, some versions ahead of of where the most. So this is kind of the sweet spot of where browser support is currently at in terms of installed browsers. But understand that Chrome 58 is just being released. Chrome 57 is kind of actually just got released. Chrome 56 is I'm not sure, but I mean mostly you're talking about these are the developer versions. This is the common release version. Safari 10, so and so on. So video is kind of an easy one. Okay. Much tougher would be kind of cutting edge things. And so you start to kind of get into these, well, how is support for something like, let me think. I was going to say web storage, but I think that one's pretty also indexed DB. See, so you do have mostly pretty well covered as well. You will see some of these are kind of this olive green instead of the full green, and those indicate partial support. So you can't necessarily count on the browser working for you in this way. We'll talk a little bit about how you address that. How many of you guys have been given? I don't know if you guys have been taught anything about the HTML5 shiv. You guys know what that means? Shout out if you have, and if you haven't, that's cool too. Let's go back and find another technology that's good. Well, actually, what's kind of cool is that if you go with the latest one, okay. So HTML5 shiv, and we'll talk more. Yeah, and it's not a prison knife. It was actually supposed to be called HTML5 shim with an M, and then the person who created it misspelled it. So what is HTML5 shiv does is it actually will help older browsers understand HTML5 or HTML5 concepts. Most of these are things like semantic markup. Otherwise, the usefulness of HTML5 shiv is diminishing pretty rapidly because a lot of browsers now support the capabilities that HTML5 shiv provided, and most notably it was Internet Explorer. As soon as Internet Explorer 10 got kind of EOL'd, there was happy dances all around the world because that was kind of the last Internet Explorer where things really aren't very compatible. So generally speaking, though, I will tell you that even though there's they technically don't support it, I personally know plenty of people who are still running XP, and I facepalm myself, and I hope none of you guys are, but I understand if it is, but it's one of these things that, oh man, you guys, XP, Vista, Windows 7, it's like, man, I know. I get that people don't want to move forward. A lot of technology is moving a lot faster than most folks are comfortable with, but it's coming, man. I'm telling you, this is the way it is. XP for life. Okay. So let's talk about one of these. So here's an interesting, this is one that I'm just discovering now, is that now there's going to be a new hex color notation in CSS that is, usually when you talk about CSS color codes, it's hash, and then 2 digits for red, hexadecimal digits, right? Hexadecimal digits for green, hex for blue, and then now they're going to add 2 more for hex for the transparency or alpha channel. And the cool thing here is that usually when you are in CSS and you start to specify colors that have transparency, you can't use this shorthand version anymore. So that's kind of a nice thing. Notice that Firefox has it, whereas Chrome is still, you can enable it by doing some experimental, you can click a checkbox in the settings to enable it, but it is still not considered supported. Whereas Safari, yeah, iOS Safari too, but yeah, Opera again, you know, but in this, it doesn't surprise me too much that Microsoft's products are kind of lagging. Yeah, JavaScript in terms of the most recent Prime version of JavaScript, which is called ECMAScript 6, and it's still a mouthful even to this day. It is a you know, commonly it is starting to become available natively in browsers, so that you can start to do a lot of it's easier to program in a lot of ways than just the way JavaScript currently is being done. And we'll kind of go into that, because we are going to do a couple weeks of talking about kind of the essentials of JavaScript. And by then, this is not going to have been resolved. So we're still going to be teaching you what's called ECMAScript 2015. And, you know, so it is, and previous, the older versions of ECMAScript, which is what people commonly refer to as JavaScript still. Let's say initial letter. So, I mean, again, I'm just trolling through these to take a look. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. So, you know, you can just type in a category of stuff and it's going to show you the capabilities. One of the other things that you can kind of get out of this is that it is they give you these little flags. So these will link off to standards documents. So what I just did was I was you know, talking about this marker pseudo element, which no browser supports. I was like, wait, there's a marker pseudo element, and it is currently in a draft, but it still will be tracked in this website. So as this feature moves through its standards process and becomes adopted, you'll start to see these turn green. So can I use, man, it's a super, you should bookmark this site, caniuse.com. And it is absolutely something that you will use, as you know, on a regular basis when you start to work on applications, websites that need to be consistent across multiple browsers, and you don't want to necessarily be kind of, you know, having your users or having your visitors be your beta testers. This is gonna save you something. Back in the old days, when Google was starting to get HTML5 off the ground from their perspective, they created this little site called HTML5rocks.com. It's a lot of really interesting tutorials here. I'm not going to go into much detail on it. Notice the dates on them, though. I mean, it's like a lot of these are from, you know, 2014 and earlier. And if you were to look through them, there's just, yeah, it keeps on going. Let me see how far back. Yeah, 2010. So, you know, 7-year-old documents that describe all of HTML5. But it's kind of like a running commentary of how this how HTML5 kind of came into being. Most of the tutorial, or most of the updates these days, are being done on the Google developers .google.com web updates. Notice here they actually talk about web components, which is something we will probably touch on, which is, I mean, this is like cutting edge sort of stuff. We'll see how the semester goes. The idea here is that this is a pretty interesting way to add functionality to that can be kind of moved from, you can reuse from site to site. So you can build something that you go, oh, you know, I remember having this capability in that browser. You can go over and pull the web component files, which will be a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can drop them into another site. So it's kind of almost like a plug-in sort of feel to it. Anyway, it's interesting, and it drives a lot of the capabilities of Google and Android's web applications, that you can basically create what looks like a native web application or what looks like a native application running on Android, but it is all running in a browser. Pretty cool. You'll find a lot of stuff on w3schools.com. It is, you know, they do have some decent tutorials. I've used the tutorials in the past. It's a mixed bag. Some of them are better than others. But what's kind of interesting about it is that they do have references for all of these, and it is relatively up to date. So you're welcome to check it out. I might be referencing these, but it is a site that you will find. And what's funny is that when you go to search, so let's say we open up a browser and we type in HTML5, right? The thing to kind of get is that they end up being a top result in search engines, and there's a reason. Is because for a lot of reasons they are viewed as something of an authority on here. But what I will also say is right underneath it is the standard that HTML5 is written, and then underneath that is the MDN, which I'll show you in just a minute, which is the Mozilla Developer Network, and that is like an encyclopedia of web information and kind of current web information. So, all right. So check it out. What w3schools.com is pretty fun. So speaking of which, let's pardon my kicking. I'm kicking my microphone. The MDN, or Mozilla Developer Network. So Mozilla, if any of it, I don't know if any of you guys knew this, but Mozilla has actually got the strongest lineage back to like the original web browsers. So does anybody know the name of the oldest kind of popular web browser before, like in the early 90s? I hope some of you were alive back then. That's a kidding. I'm waiting and seeing if somebody has an answer, but maybe you don't. Anyhow, while you ponder that question, Netscape is close. It was actually predates Netscape, but that's okay. No, not AOL. Sorry, nice try though. Netscape actually is the direct predecessor of Mozilla. In fact, Netscape launched the Mozilla Foundation, which is awkward silence. I know, I love it. So the Netscape was the company that launched the Mozilla foundation, and so it does have that lineage. But actually, the browser that came before Netscape that actually turned into Netscape was called Mosaic, and this was done by Mark Andreessen, who now is like, I don't know, worth I don't know how many zeros come after his net worth, but it's a lot. And he's when he was in college in Chicago, I think it was the University of Chicago Urbana-Champaign or something like that. So there was a computing center there, and they made this browser, and that was actually the first browser I ever used. And that dates me a lot. But it's interesting to note that the Mozilla the Mozilla Foundation has the pedigree going all the way back there. I mean, it literally will go all the way back to Mosaic, the first kind of really mainstream web browser that was out there back in the early 90s. So what am I looking at here? So the MDN has topics on a wide variety of stuff, but I mean, they go pretty deep on all of these. But most, the first three are the ones that you're likely to care about the most, in more or less this order: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So they do have a large set of reference material on exhaustive reference is the right thing. They do have tutorials as well, and they also have a basics that you can kind of go through. Most of these are it's done in a very wiki format, so it's going to be very uneven in terms of quality level, though generally speaking, Mozilla has had very, very great, very deep and well-maintained documentation. So it is, yeah, it's a really valuable. I've used, you'll find that you bookmark a lot of these, as I don't seem to have it bookmarked right now, but that's another matter. There, if you go into this, it will also talk about new features of and features that are coming into common use. So yeah, and they are very well aligned on the kind of the standards of how web technology is developing. We're going to come back to more of that. So this one is actually the working group for what's called ARIA, which is the Accessible Rich Internet Applications Working Group. These are the people that deal with all of the accessibility standards that we will cover in the class. It is it's an interesting notion to follow along, but most of these end up being most of how accessibility is going to play for you guys is it's going to be involving using plugins in your browser to basically highlight areas of your websites that are non-compliant with some of these, and understand that in certain circumstances, like working for the JC, or for a government, or city or county, state government, some nonprofits, you need to be compliant with these standards, and it's actually legally required to be. So yeah, keep that in mind. Again, MDN has deep levels of reference on JavaScript. They have their own tutorials. Again, I'm not sure how much I'm going to delve into these. I'm certainly not going to do it today. One of the tools that we're going to use a fair bit, or at least to make sure that you guys are coding as compliant as possible, is using the markup validation service. They also have a CSS validation service that I don't use as much, but you can. But what you'll do is when you turn in homework, or when you submit your websites for homework, I'm going to run them through this. And if there are errors, then that costs you some points. And if there are warnings, that costs you some points too. So just be aware of it. It's something where early on in the semester, I'm not as strict about it, but as we get on there, I'm kind of like, look, come on, we've been at this for weeks now. You should be able to deal with it. I will tell you though that it can sometimes lead you to kind of fits of rage to have this thing tell you that you're okay. And I can appreciate that. I've had one student effectively argue why I should let him get away with not having something compliant, but that's only one person. So if you're feeling lucky, all right. Again, back to MDN. I wanted to talk a little bit about JavaScript APIs. There are many APIs available to you. And what can make your eyes glaze over is just the sheer quantity of them. And I don't show you this to intimidate you, but just to show you that it's a noisy area, and that you want to be careful about which ones you spend time learning about. Most of the ones we're going to talk about are in this list, but they are there's just a few of them, not too many of them. You don't have to, I would not recommend going brute force through this list. What if the plugins cause the warning? That has not been the experience to this point. So again, you could prove me wrong. I'm open to that, but I haven't been proven wrong yet. So there's the list of what's available in terms of web APIs is pretty long, and can be daunting. But just be clear that one of the things we're mostly, the ones that we're going to focus on in this course are going to be kind of the ones that are pretty commonly out there right now. One is the notification API, which allows you to, put a little if your user approves it, it will send a notification to their OS, and that OS will display it in a certain way. Sometimes it's a little flyout box that might be over in this area, or might come up from the bottom, or so there's a variety of ways that it can be displayed. But the notification API is definitely one of those up and coming ones. Device orientation. So if you're using a mobile device and you want to be able to know that it has changed from an upright orientation to a horizontal orientation, there's an API that can tell you that. If the browser supports it, again, you go back to can I use, and you might type that in. Next up is geolocation. This is the one that everyone salivates over. It's like, oh, I want to be able to stick the pin in the map that says where I'm at. So this will give you, if the user allows it, it will give you the, and if the browser supports it, it will give you the latitude and longitude of where you are on the planet, which is pretty cool. I mean, and that is something that is very much a usable piece of information. And what's funny is that sometimes people will just allow browser or websites to know where they're located just automatically. They're like, I don't care if the browser knows where I'm at. And that's actually kind of an interesting discussion we're not really going to touch on, but it talks about the privacy concerns of a lot of web technology. Notification is part of it. Geolocation is a huge part as well. And the local storage is also part of that, is in terms of enabling, you're enabling some other person's computer to put data on your computer. Are you okay with that? You should be thinking about these things. The Canvas API. So when we talk about drawing in the HTML5 canvas, the only way to draw in HTML5 canvas is use JavaScript. Otherwise, it's just a blank box on the screen. It doesn't really do anything. So the last thing here is, so web components, like I said, it depends on the schedule. We might cover it in some amount and be able to cover that stuff. But generally speaking, that's kind of the majority of what we're going to touch on tonight, or this semester. I don't know that I've got a ton more right now, but I'm willing to field some questions from you guys. And let me know also if you think YouTube, the YouTube Live was worked pretty well. I hope it sounds better, because, man, I'll tell you, the one thing that was driving me up a wall was having to listen to the output from CCC Confer, which was making me kind of crazy. So I'm a video producer, and I love my screencasts to sound good, and CCC Confer just don't do that for me. So yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad. It looks like it worked out okay. Do you guys have any questions for me in terms of or things that I've shown that, or things I haven't shown that you want to make sure I get to? To a certain degree, I'm willing to be flexible here, because I've got the mandate I have here is just to make sure that I got you guys kind of past the bar for being able to go out and create web apps beyond just your jQuery sort of stuff. I know that you guys touched on jQuery in B. Normally that would be something that I would put into this class, or I would put, I would move more kind of deeper into. But I also know that the level of JavaScript that you guys might have had to this point doesn't really touch on the fundamentals very well, and so that's why I'm going to have a couple weeks where we do cover those fundamentals, which is really talking about the functional programming model of how JavaScript actually functions, so that when you go to look at some code, you can start to kind of make sense of it. Whereas if you're just putting in the $, like $paren for jQuery, you're really missing out on kind of the true potential of this platform. Like, you know, you can, using jQuery, you can access a lot of these APIs, but at the same time, you know, there's a bigger world out there. I know that a lot of okay, so the Cloud9. So regarding Cloud9, the Cloud9 does not shut down the instance. So what you can do, and I think I talk about that in my video. I believe I do. I will go into more detail about it. But when you create those sites, and you run the workspace, is what they call it, is you're running the workspace. When you run the workspace, you can disconnect from it. It's going to keep running. So you'll have the ability to go in and you know, run a site. It will create a special URL for that site, and you can submit that URL as your homework. Now, I'm probably going to ask everybody, when you create your workspaces for your assignments, that you will, you're also going to add my user as a collaborator, so that if I show up on your workspace and it's not running, I can run it. Because if I'm in what they call read-only mode, I can't actually do anything other than preview. But previewing is probably okay at this point, so I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to make trouble for you. But what I really want to make sure is that we're able to have you guys submit homework and not worry about how you know, how you're having it graded, because I can go in there and I can turn it on and keep it in, and you don't have to. We can just leave the workspaces there, because we have as many workspaces as we can possibly make. I think that's the really kind of cool thing, is that it can definitely be a shared environment for us to use, where we can see everyone's work develop over time. It'll allow you guys to be able to check in and see what other people are doing with their sites. And I think that is hugely valuable for a lot of folks. I mean, I knew from a previous semester that it wasn't putting on any well, in previous semesters, we would the students were having trouble being able to see each other's work and see each other's websites. And I want this to be kind of front and center. And I think that Cloud9 is the way to do that. So Corey, your question about hosting, this is exactly the question. And so part of this is, I'm going to ask that you guys use Cloud9 for hosting this time, and really kind of let's at least commit to this experiment in terms of this shared environment. It is absolutely capable of you know, putting up almost any website that you could need to implement for school. The nice thing is that, you know, I'll keep it up for probably at least a month into the summertime, where you guys can be able to pull your content off after the semester's over, if you want to keep it. If you don't, then I'll blow it away after like June or July, and then I'll move on. But I think that the benefit of having this incremental space, where every week's assignment is its own kind of self-contained thing, is a benefit for you guys, especially when you go to it. And even if it were an incremental change, where you were working on something and you just wanted to start from that point when you worked on the next week's homework, you could, what they call it forking. You can copy the workspace to a new workspace and start from that point, and the old workspace stays where it is. So you'll have a week 1, you'll have a week 2, and so on. And so I think that is, and it's free for you guys. It doesn't cost me very much. I'm paying $1 a month for all of this. And I'm like, yeah, for $5, I think I'll spot it. I'll spot you guys $5, and we'll make this work for this semester. And it's a great deal, and I think it's really gonna make hosting work. It's gonna solve the hosting thing where it doesn't get weird, because I know that I do have it becomes this very uneven playing field for a lot of folks. You have some people who have zero money and they're like, I can't do anything except whatever's the cheapest thing, and I get it. I totally get that. I'm an adjunct faculty member, so I totally understand. Then you have the flip side where they're like, well, I am already making websites for a living and I'm just taking this class as a refresher. And so there's are you limited in how many pages you can build? Not really. I mean, magnum opus is you're welcome to try. I mean, the space limits that you have for Cloud9 are you have 2 gigabytes of storage on a disk, and you have 512 megabytes of memory in the web, in the instance. And 512 megs is a big amount of memory for a web server. So yeah, you can develop lots of stuff. I mean, is it going to be something that you could scale? No, this is a development environment. I would never use Cloud9 to run a production application. But the cool thing here is that, it does have, hooks into sites like Bitbucket and GitHub, which I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to do much covering. I wanted, at one point I wanted to explore the notion of introducing you guys to version control and those sorts of things. I don't think that it's fair right now, based on how the course is arranged, to be able to put that together. But so the short answer for you, which is already too late, is that there's no real limit to how many pages you can build. You have a big sandbox to play in. You can make as many sandboxes as you want, but please don't go crazy. But your first homework assignment, which I need to do a video, I need to do a screencast of, kind of walking you kind of through exactly what you need to do. Most of that is actually handled in the Cloud9 kind of onboarding video that I did, and it is on the website. I just went in there before we started this lecture and made sure that those videos are posted in the module. So when you go to look on the homework, it's going to say get connected. There's 2 videos there, one for creating the Cloud9 account, one for creating CodePen. So you guys can do that. Again, like I said, at the end of tonight, which looks like it's pretty rapidly approaching, I will be able to go find all the registered students. I'm going to send you guys each an invite to Cloud9, and then you guys can go create your accounts, get tied into the workspace, start creating workspaces in the team workspace, and just, you start to play a little bit. I mean, this week is largely just getting you familiar with the environment that we're going to work in. We're really going to start doing the work of the class next week as we start to move into kind of the advanced topics, so like semantics, semantic markup, and those sorts of things, and we'll go from there. Okay. All right. So what time we got? It's time check. It's about 7:30. Man, it feels like it's later. I think that's part of the downside of winter time, is that I'm still. I look outside. I'm like, yeah, it's like midnight, right? Yeah. Anyway. Okay, I hope you guys really got a lot out of this. It sounded like you guys, it was good viewing and good sounding, which is big thumbs up for me. I like this. I'm inclined to do it this way the whole semester right now. Unless we hit some kind of roadblock that basically crashes and burns this whole plan, I think that this is a good idea. And I'm glad that you guys can hear me. I mean, the only thing that I liked about doing this with CCC Confer in the past was sometimes I could get other students on the phone or online and they could ask questions. I think sometimes online lectures can be a little bit tough especially when CCC Confer has a really rough audio interface, and so it can be you can strain to hear things. And again, I'd much rather you guys clearly understand what's being said, and I can repeat the questions that I get on the chat, and I keep the chat on the window. So I mean, you guys can read what you write as you go. Please keep it clean. All right, I think that's it for tonight. Thank you guys all for coming, and this will be on the module 1 or week 1 lecture page in the module. So you will shortly after I get done sending out the invites, I'll take care of that. Have a good night, everyone, and I'll see you later.